The purpose of this video is to work through some slides from the Chapter 2, Part 2 slide deck. These are the slides for elasticity. We're going to start off working slide number 3 from that slide deck. According to Duffy and Dino, when the price of broadband access capacity increases 10%, commercial customers buy about 3.8% less capacity. What is the elasticity of demand for broadband access capacity for firms? Is demand at the current price elastic or inelastic? We know that the elasticity of demand coefficient is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. So this problem is telling us that when we have a 10% increase in price, quantity demanded decreases by 3.8%. And so we write that as the percent change in quantity demanded is negative 3.8 because it is decreasing. And this gives us an elasticity coefficient of negative 0.38, which is inelastic. This is showing us that every time price goes up by 1%, quantity demanded is going to go down by 0.38. And so we can see it's inelastic because the change in price is greater than the change in quantity demanded. Consumers here are not very responsive to a price change. Suppose the price elasticity of demand for wheat is negative 0.25. So this is a key. This is relatively inelastic. And then we have the invention of a new inexpensive herbicide which kills a weed known to reduce wheat yields. What will it cause? So since demand is relatively inelastic, we're going to draw the demand to be relatively steep. Okay? And so this is showing us that consumers are not very responsive to a price change. Now, when we get this technological change, this invention of a new herbicide is an example of technological change, and that's going to increase the supply. That is one of the determinants of supply. We know that's going to increase supply. So we know that there's going to be an increase in the market equilibrium quantity of wheat. But what's going to happen to total revenue? We know that when demand is relatively inelastic, that the percent change in price is going to be bigger than the percent change in quantity demanded. The price change is going to dominate. And so this makes it so that if we write total revenue is equal to price times quantity, here we have a price drop. And so we're going to, since it's inelastic, we're going to draw the price change relatively big, and the quantity change we're going to show as being relatively small. So the length of the arrows represent the magnitude of the change. Price drops by a lot. Since consumers are not very responsive to a price change, then quantity demanded is not going to increase by very much. And so you can see that total revenue is going to be dominated by the price change. Total revenue is going to go down. Now we can also see this in the graph as follows. This rectangle right here represents total revenue 1. Why is that? The area of a rectangle is equal to height times base. And here the height is price 1 and the base is quantity 1. So we've got price 1 times quantity 1 is the area of that rectangle, or in other words, total revenue 1. And after the price drops, you can see there's a new rectangle that represents total revenue. And you can, so this is the rectangle made up by price 2 times quantity 2, or in other words, total revenue 2 is the area of that rectangle, and you can see the area is smaller. And so there's going to be a decrease in combined total revenue earned by wheat farmers. And so the correct answer is B. This helps explain something that we've seen over time in the United States and throughout the developed world. In the 1800s, in the early 1800s, it was over 70% of the working population worked on the farm, whereas today we have less than 2% of the population, working on farms. And why is that? Well, one of the key reasons is because of technological change and the fact that demand is relatively inelastic. And so every time we get technological change like better herbicides, which kill weeds, better tractors, better irrigation equipment, better crops that are more disease resistant, all these are examples of technological change, and it increases the supply. And demand is relatively inelastic because even if price drops, say from $9 down to $3, which this is a reasonable price drop. This is the type of variability that we often see among agricultural commodities. So relatively big drop in price, but what happens to the amount of calories that we as Americans consume from wheat products if the price of a bushel of wheat drops from $9 to $3, are we going to triple the amount of calories that we get from wheat products? Of course not. That's just not possible. We as Americans would be even more overweight. And so when price drops, we don't consume that much more. And so that drives total revenue down, which makes it harder and harder for farmers. We've had a large movement of farmers going out of business and workers moving from the farm into the city, so that we've gone from over 70% of the working population on the farm down to less than 2% today. And our farms, to be able to survive producing commodities at such a lower price, have had to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so this graph helps explain why it is that our previous Americans, so many lived on the farm, and yet today so few do. The demand for corn increases. As a result, the price of corn will blank, and the less elastic the supply of corn, the blank will be the effect on the price. This is slide 15 in the slide deck. Let's go ahead and draw a graph to help analyze this. Let's draw two supply curves. We're going to draw one supply curve that represents the less elastic supply curve, and another supply curve that represents the more elastic, where producers are able to be more responsive to a price change. And here we have an increase in demand. So let's say we've got supply A, supply B. This one is less elastic, and this one is more elastic. And get this increase in demand. And you can see that as we move along the less elastic supply curve, we get a relatively large increase in price and a relatively small increase in quantity. For the more elastic supply curve, the price increase is relatively small and the quantity increase is relatively big. And so the demand for corn increases. As a result, the price of corn will rise, and the less elastic the supply of corn, the greater will be the effect on the price. Okay, now we're looking at slide 16 from our slide deck. The university in a small college town suddenly increases enrollment by 20%. What will be the effect of this on the rental price of housing in the first semester after the increase in enrollment versus 5 years after? So let's go ahead and illustrate this graphically. So the supply in the short run is going to be relatively inelastic, and the supply in the long run is going to be relatively elastic. So for most goods, more time means more elastic. This is because more time gives suppliers more of an opportunity to respond to that price change. When there's an increase in demand, at first, suppliers of housing, they're not able to do much about it because there's only so much housing built. They can try to put more people into rooms, and the occupants of the rooms, since they're going to be paying a much higher price, probably going to be more willing to accept roommates too. So the price in the short run goes up by quite a bit, and there's not really much of an opportunity for suppliers to respond in the short run. So there's not much of an increase in quantity. But what's going to happen in the long run? In the long run, this higher price is going to attract builders to build more. And so in the long run, as they build more, that price will come down to a more reasonable point. So this is going to be the price in the long run. And here's the quantity in the long run. So we build more housing in the college town, we're going to see a relatively large quantity response. And the ultimate price increase in the long run is from P1 up here to P long run. So you don't see much of a price increase in the long run. The price increase will be the most in the short run. So it looks like the correct answer is B.